Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today we're going to be taking a look at the final build of the week, and that is the Dragon Guard. Now I've held off on this one, mainly because, see, a lot of people don't realize I've been playing this build for like 3 months on my main DK, because I love this build. This build is so cool, and I can't say exactly how I came up with the build, but I can tell you this much, guys. It works really, really good as a tank build. So, this is the DK off-tank, the Dragon Guard. Taking a look at the stats here, you'll see that we are rocking a 27k magicka, a 30k health, and a 20k stamina. Now, there's a reason why we have the stats set up the way we do. The build does not work any other way, and it has to be a Dark Elf. It has to be. This is the only build I'm releasing that has to have a certain thing. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. I've tried it with other races. It does not work. You can be a vampire if you want, because you are a Dark Elf, and it does help out, but this build has to be a Dark Elf. It has to be set up this way, and it only works this one way. So, the magic is 27k, 30k health, 20k stamina, 1005 magic recovery, and it does get a lot higher than that, with a health recovery that's... And then, of course, we have the stamina recovery of 534. Don't worry about the stamina recovery too much. You'll be able to manage it pretty well. On the spell damage, you can see we have an 1808 with a 39% crit. Magic crit, that's pretty good, if you ask me. And then moving on, we have a 25k spell resistance with a 21 physical resistance. Now, you do run sword and shield and staff on this build, but I don't use a ice staff, and I'll get to the reason why in a second. So moving on down here, we are running the Lady Mundastone. It requires it because you need that extra boost in resistances to keep the build working really effectively. Now, again, this is an off-tank, so you don't need as much in resistances because you're not tanking 100% of the time. You are a DK, so you can mitigate a lot more damage when blocking, especially with sword and shield. Next up, we have Major Prophecy because we are rocking Inner Light, and we are using Tri-Stat food. So make sure you have that Tri-Stat food going all the time when you're in Dungeons and Trials, because you need that extra resources. Okay, now we're going to move into the gear, and now this is going to, things are going to start to you'll be a little bit more understandable. One of the main sets we're running is Grothdar, and we're running a medium helm, heavy shoulders, and the medium helm, or the set itself, sorry, not the medium helm, but we are running 3 infused, 4 sturdy, or 5 sturdy on the sword and shield, and so we have 4 sturdy when we don't have the shield, and 5 when we do. And the reason why this build works so well is because of Grothdar is a part of it. Grothdar gives you increased max magicka, and then the 2 pieces, when you deal damage, you have a 10% chance to create lava pools that swirl around you, dealing X amount of fire damage. You have to be a Dark Elf for it to work the best. Now, the fire damage from this is boosted because you're a Dark Elf. You get 7% more fire damage, and your champion points. You have 10% into Elemental Expert, increasing your fire damage by another 10%. So that's 17% increase to this thing's fire damage. It's super, super important. Now, this is an 8-meter radius that the flame damage ticks. It ticks for 5 seconds and can happen every 10 seconds. So this is a great way to add to your total DPS pool. Moving on to the next set, we are running Julianus, 5-piece heavy. And not all of it's heavy, just the chest, the gloves, the legs, and the boots are heavy. The gloves are actually light, or the belt is actually light. Now, we are running 3 infused, 3 Tri-Stat glyphs, and the side ones are actually Tri-Stat as well. This one is running all Tri-Stat. It doesn't work any other way. It's a very expensive build, but at the same time, in the end results are way better than you could ever imagine. So it works out really well. Now, you can run magic here if you want, magic here and here, and magic here and here, and you can just put more into health and just kind of compensate, but you really need your stamina pool at 20k. It doesn't work without it being at 20k. So that's why the Tri-Stat glyphs. Alright, moving on down the list here. of sets. The next set is going to be the one that's going to throw people off, and that is because I'm running the fire set. Now, the reason I'm running the fire set is because when I'm on sword and board and I deal damage with my weapon abilities, I can also proc extra fire damage. As you can see, 5,157 extra fire damage, and this can happen every 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds, I throw out a taunt, I throw out a light attack, I throw out a heavy attack, I can proc that extra damage every 2 seconds. This is a great setup. Now, it does give you increased stamina, and it does give you weapon damage and weapon critical, and that's why your weapon crit is 27% and your spell crit is 39%. Now, if I swap bars, I want you guys to see this, my weapon damage goes down, but my magic damage stays the same. And that's because staves and one-handed weapons, or one-handed sword and shield, uses the same amount of weapon damage, gets the same amount no matter what. But you'll also notice I lose some stamina when I switch bars, and I lose some health and magicka. But that's because I lose the benefit of the shield. It doesn't work with sword and shield backbar. I've tried it. I've tried it with an ice staff. It doesn't work. So the sword and shield we're running is the fire sword and shield. We're running a tri-stat here, sturdy. This is where we're getting that extra. See, we get 3 infused here with the tri-stat glyphs. And then this is sturdy with tri-stat glyph. But when we swap between bars, look what happens. When we swap to the staff, we actually lose the 5-piece bonus. So it's fine to lose that 5-piece bonus because you only need it on the sword and board. You need it, the staff is for something else. Now the staff we're running is, okay, first off, the sword we're running is fire, infused with the hardening enchant. The staff we're running is an inferno staff, a fire staff. And there's a big reason why we're running a fire staff. I'll get to that in a second. But if you guys look here, this one has a Crusher enchant. It is infused, so it gets greater effect from the Crusher enchant. And the nice thing about it is, when you're in a dungeon or in a trial and you're taking on trash, this is going to be your main weapon of choice to use. So, and when you switch bars, you do lose some physical resistance and spell resistance, but don't think of it as a bad thing. It's actually a pretty good thing when you're fully buffed up. So that is the gear, that is the traits, and also on the jewelry, we are running 2 magic recovery and 1 spell damage. The reason we're running Julianus is because it gives us 299 spell damage all the time, and that's why we have the 1 spell damage here. The reason we're running the fire set is because it does give us a little bit of extra weapon damage, as you can see here, and that little bit of weapon damage can really play with this build really well. So, alright, let's move on to skills, and this is where things are going to get a little different for most people, because my other build that I made that's a DK runs Bone Shield. This one actually runs Fragmented Shield, and there's a big reason why. We'll get to that in a second. So, first off, passives. Always make sure you fill out all your class passives, very important. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on reasons why. I'll be doing that when I do my guide to tanking, and why it's important to make sure you fill out all your passives. Moving on to the weapon skills, make sure you fill out the weapon passives. Make sure that on this, you do take Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, and Absorb Magic. Just those 3 abilities. The other ones are useless to you for a certain reason. We'll get to that too. So for here, having these skills is good, but the passives are going to be really important. Also, make sure you fill out all the Destruction Staff passives. You only use 1 skill from here, and that's Unstable Wall of Elements. Yes, unstable. And then moving on down the line, light armor, make sure you fill out the top 3. Medium armor, fill out the top 2, and the bottom 1. Heavy armor, make sure you fill out all the passives. I mainly want to kind of get through this so I can tell you guys about the skills, so, and the skill setup and why. Soul Magic, same thing, fill out these 2. On guilds, Fighters Guild, you're only going to take Intimidating Presence and Banish the Wicked. On the Mages Guild, you want to make sure you have Inner Light, and you want to make sure also, you want to make sure you have this Magic Controller. With Inner Light equipped, you get 5% increased max magicka. With this here, you get another 2%, making it 7% in total. Moving on to the Undaunted, you can have Inner Rage if you need a ranged taunt. Now, if you are going to trade this with anything, swap it out with this ability right here. with the Unstable Wall. Just with Unstable Wall. And that's only if you need it. You shouldn't need it, to be honest. So, moving on down the line, again, Alliance. Make sure you have Aggressive Warlord. Support side, you're going to notice I don't have any of it. And there's a reason why. It's just, it doesn't work with this build. It doesn't work. No matter how much you want it to, it doesn't work. Moving on down the line again, Dark Elf, all passives. Especially this one, and especially this and this. You need all three of these for it to work. And you can go, now you can go Vampire with this, because you do get the Flame Resistance, which is roughly, it's almost like 75% of the damage. Like, you take like 100, you take 100% fire damage or whatever it is with being a vampire. Whatever that damage is, this is literally 75% reducing it. So that's why it's really good to be a Dark Elf with this. And Vampire does work really good. I just didn't have the time to wait for it to get to Stage 2, Stage 3, Stage 4, and all that kind of stuff. So moving on, Alchemy, Medicinal Use, and Provisioning. Make sure you have Gourmand and Connoisseur. Now let's go over the skills. So on the main bar, you're going to want Pierce Armor right here. You have to have it right here. It works really good. It gives you Major Breach, Major Fracture. That applies for 12 seconds. It also gives you a 15-second taunt. It does a small amount of damage, but that's not the type of damage you need to worry about. The next one is Heroic Slash. This does a small amount of damage. Also applies the CC of movement speed reduction. And on top of that, you get Minor Maim and Major Heroism. Now, our Minor Heroism, these are really important for this build, for it to work really good, especially in the dungeon setting. In a trial, it's just for Warhorn purposes. Next up, Fragmented Shield. Now, the reason I'm using Fragmented Shield, now instead of the other shield, is because of two things. This one absorbs 3,621 damage. Your own damage shield absorbs 200% more damage. So you get like a 9k shield with it. And when using the Hardening Enchant on there, you have like a 14k damage shield. So it helps you mitigate a big chunk of damage. But it's the next thing it does. When your own shield is removed or expires, it shatters, dealing 3,636 magic damage to nearby enemies. This is just a way to add extra damage to your capability of tanking. Now, it still costs a lot of magicka, but you have a greater magicka pool, so you can actually kind of utilize this quite a bit. Moving on to the next one, Absorb Magic. Now, this is kind of a good thing to have, especially for the fact of the reduced damage you take while blocking and the reduced cost of blocking. So these are really essential. Next up, we have Inner Light. Remember, 5%, 7% for having that one passive. So 7% increase in max magicka. And then, of course, Aggressive Warhorn. This is like really, really, really important to have this here. It increases max magicka, stamina, and health by 10%. But it also grants major force. This plays with you really well, because you're going to be utilizing Warhorn when you swap bars. You're going to fire Warhorn, swap bars, and drop your Wall of Elements. And the reason why is because you're going to want to get that Unstable Wall out, and you're going to want to get the Fire Breath out to get the increased damage. So moving to the back bar, this is where things get really cool. On the back bar, we have Engulfing Flames. Now, Engulfing Flames, if you read what it does a damage up front, damage over time. Not a lot of damage over time, but affected enemies take 10% more damage from all fire damage. Now, I want to point something out to you, why this is such a great build because of Destruction Staff. Trifocus. Fully charged heavy attacks deal 12% additional damage. Ancient Knowledge. Fire Staff increases your damage done with single target abilities by 8%. So that means your heavy attacks, your light attacks are increased by 8%. Now, we're not done there. Next up, we have Unstable Wall. Now, Unstable Wall ticks for damage. It lasts for 6 seconds. It ticks for damage. And burning enemies take 20% more damage from this ability. If you guys don't know, DKs are actually one of the most powerful dot dealers in the game. Doesn't matter whether you're playing stamina or magicka. And it's because of things like combustion. Increases the damage of burning and poison status effects by 50%. You also get warmth, When you deal damage with an Ardent Flame ability, you reduce the movement speed by 30%. Now remember, when I use this, it reduces their movement speed by 30%. But also, they have 60% movement speed reduction too. So they can have a lot of movement speed reduction, making it less able for them to move around. I also get Searing Heat, which increases the damage of my Fiery Breath, Searing Strike, and Dragonite Standard by 3%. And the duration is increased by 2 seconds. Next up, we get World in Ruin. Increases the damage of your Flame and Poison area of effect abilities by 6%. This is an area of effect. This is an area of effect. It doesn't say just Ardent Flame. It says all area of effect abilities. So both of these are area of effect abilities, and it increases their damage by 6%. This is why this build works so well as an off tank. Next up is Molten Armaments. This is super essential for this build. This grants you major sorcery for 40 seconds almost, but your fully charged heavy attacks deal increased by 40% damage. Now, because of the way we set our champion points up, this is boosted a lot. Next up is Hardened Armor. A lot of people don't like Hardened Armor. I do. I think it's one of the better ones to use for the mitigation, because it does grant major resolve and major ward at 5,280 for 20 seconds, but it also gives you a damage shield for 18% of your max health. And then while it's active, you deal magic damage back to your enemies. So that's why I said this in the last video. This is why I don't use Bone Shield on this one, but I use this instead. It redirects damage back to the enemy for the duration of the 20 seconds. So this thing is like an indirect damage beast. I'm constantly redirecting damage back to my enemies with this, and also with my champion points, which we'll get to. So the final ability I have here, besides the ultimate, is Inner Light, and then the ultimate. Now, I'm using Standard of Might. This does flame damage every second for 17 seconds. It also applies Major Defile for that 17 seconds. Standing in the area increases your damage done and reduces damage taken by 15%. So that means that fire damage that I'm using is being increased by 15%. And the damage I take is being reduced by 15%. Now, if you want to, and you're playing a different race besides the Dark Elf, you can drop this if you're playing like a High Elf, and you can take Flames of Oblivion instead, and you can have this there to do a little bit of extra damage, but really it's not worth it. So, but Standard of Might definitely is one you need. Also, Standard of Might is a synergy, and when activated, it shackles the enemy, locks them down, and deals fire damage to enemies in the area, immobilizing them for 5 seconds. So, really good synergy. Lots of good stuff in this build, guys, and it's a really fun build to play. If you haven't ever tried to play this build or experience this build is so much fun. And this is why I like it so much. So I do want to show you guys just a little bit, real quick, this. So when you buff up, your actual spell damage goes to 2,169, and your weapon damage goes up just a little bit because you get the 5% for buffing up, but your resistances go to 30k and 26. When you swap bars, they drop, but not enough to make it to where you can't tank. You can still effectively tank this way. But when you tank this way, you're going to want to make sure that when you're on this staff bar, you have this popped, that up, and make sure you at least try to get your damage shield going. So that way when you're on this bar, you can mitigate some of that damage, so you can put down your wall of your fire breath and your wall of unstable wall of fire. And when unstable wall ends, it explodes and does damage. So remember how I told you this is about indirect damage? Yeah, that's part of it. That wall ends, it explodes. So it's constantly about dealing like damage. And it's not a DPS tank, guys. It's not. It's just to add more damage to the group's total pool. And this thing does it super well. So let's get into the champion points. Again, very similar all the way through the tree, all the way until we get to the blue tree, to my other tanks. So starting here, 37 points in Ironclad. This reduces damage taken by 15% from direct damage. 37 into Thick Skin, reducing the damage taken from damage over time by 15%. And both of these, by the way, do stack with Hardy and Elemental Defender. So Hardy, we have 43 points, and Elemental Defender, 43 points. This reduces the damage taken that we take from pretty much everything by 10%. Moving on to this last bar, or last spot in the red tree, we have 56 in the Bastion. This increases our effectiveness of damage shields by 20%. And then 16 into Expert Defender. This reduces the damage we take from light and heavy attacks by 10%. And then 8 into Quick Recovery. DKs get an insane amount of healing received. This just adds to it, guys. Now, before anyone says, what about healing on this build? Yeah, you need a healer. In order for this build to work, you need a good healer. So, next up, Warlord. 23 points. This increase reduces the cost to break free. Just a way to manage some better resource management, so you're not spending as much utilizing these things, because you will be breaking free. Next up, Bashing Focus. Reduce the cost of bash by 10%. And then we'll move on to this tree. This is where everything is a little different. We have 75 into Arcanus. This increases our magic recovery by 14%. That extra 4%, along with the 4% for wearing one piece of light, is 18% magic recovery. That's the amount of our magic recovery on this build, 18%. So that's why we have the 2 magic recovery glyphs, is to increase the amount of magic recovery we have. The more magic recovery would be better, but honestly, this just works out really good. Moving on, Tenacity. 43 points, increasing the amount of magic stamina we get back from our heavy attacks by 10%. In total, it's 65% we get back, so we can manage resources really well. Moving on to this tree, the final of the green tree, we have 10 in the Befoul. This increases our healing reduction. So when we put down that Banner of Might, we actually reduce the healing received to the enemies by 10%, making that Major Defile in the banner be 33%. 17 into Tumbling. This gives us a reduced dodge roll cost of 7%, along with the one-piece medium armor, and it's passive. We get another 4%, making an 11% reduced cost in dodge rolling, which kind of helps out. And then, of course, 56 in the Shadow Ward. This reduces our block cost by 20%. Now, you're gonna mostly want to block on Sword and Shield most of the time. That's why we have the 20k stamina. That's it. That's the reason why we do. So, moving on to the next and final tree, the Mage's Tree. This is where things are different. We have 43 into Blessed. We don't really need it, but if you do want to use a healing ability, by the way, I would suggest using Searing Strikes, morphed into the Burning Embers. This will give you a heal when the effect ends. This has a heal, I thought. Or no, this one doesn't. Yeah, that's just it. Just that one. This one. But you can also take Coagulated Blood if you feel like you need it. And if you do take Coagulated Blood, just drop this. Molten Armaments, it's fine. Even though this does improve your DPS, you can put Coagulated Blood on there if you need a heal. And this is based on 33% of your max health. But it's also, it's based on Magicka. So, and it costs a lot of Magicka, by the way. This one, you draw Draconic Blood to heal you for 5,260, increasing it up to 33% base of your missing health. So you get a chunk of health plus 33%. It's a much bigger heal. And then you gain Major Fortitude, increasing your health recovery, which you don't really need. But it is a great heal. So if you want to swap this in here, you can. It will work with that 43 points into here, like I said. But you don't really need this. You can put this elsewhere if you want. Next up, we have 23 into Elfborn. This increases our critical damage done with fire and our critical heals, if we have any, by 10%. 43 into Elemental Expert. Remember I was telling you guys, DK, Dark Elves, they get 7%. This is 10%. That's 17% increase in fire damage. That's why it works so good with these two sets that we're running, Grothdar and the other one. And then on to the middle tree. This is where things get a little different. But remember when I showed you guys the one buff that we use that increases our light and heavy attacks by 40%? That's why we only have 16 in here and 16 in here. Is because we get 50% more damage from our light and heavy attacks. With either sword and shield and or staff. Now we also get another 15% on top of that from our light and heavy attacks because they're direct damage abilities. So that 50% becomes 65%. Just like with the other one, we do get retaliate or reposit. And whenever you block an attack, doesn't matter if you're on the staff or the sword and shield, you do get to block more, block it and redirect damage back to your enemies. And this is where some of that more indirect damage comes from. Next up, we have Shattering Blows of 23 points. This increases the damage we do to enemies with damage shields by 10%. So it just helps us do more damage to them. And then moving on over here, we have 16 in the Mighty, giving us a 4.48% increase in our physical damage. So it helps with that sword and shield damage, or that, yeah, our sword and shield damage. But we have 23 in Thaumaturge. This increases the damage of our damage over time abilities by 10%. This build's a little different, but like I said, after doing a lot of iterational work to it and everything over the last, since Clockwork City, because that's when I found the build, I played the build or started the build, was Clockwork City. I can't say I found it, but during Clockwork City I started playing this build, and this build was just crazy fun. So I actually turned my Dark Elf DK into this build, and have been playing him this way pretty much ever since. I play him in PvP, I play him in PvE, all that, and it's just really, really fun. It's insane fun. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure you have these points filled out that way. Now, you don't get a lot of benefits, I'm not going to lie, that you do, like if you're running Sword and Shield, but you do get a lot of benefits that can help out. So let me go ahead and show you guys how this build works. So basically, the thing you want to do is make sure you have this and this up all the time. You're going to start with the Fire Breath, Wall of Elements, Switch Bars, Taunt, and then basically just hold block. Because even your Wall of Elements, when it explodes, can proc that Groth Dart. And this is a really focuses a lot on blocking. So this build, it does focus a lot on blocking, and that's why we want that greater reduced cost. We want that 20% there, 20% from champion points, 36. Overall, it's like 76% reduced cost. So if you take the 1730 and reduce it by 76%, that's what your total cost is going to be. It's crazy. Like, it's pretty low. It's like 500 stamina to block. 500-600, something like that, to block the enemy. I have the calculations on another thing. I have to look it up, but yeah. But yeah, it's a very, very powerful build. And it works out really good, especially when you can pull off a couple heavy attacks. Watch these. If I can get it to crit, let me see. And you can see it. 13k crits. It's crazy. And if you have Pierce Armor applied to him, and the Crusher enchant from the Destruction Staff, the damage you do is even greater. It's like 15k or 16k crits on the normal mobs out here. But that is pretty much it for this build, guys. This is the Dragon Guard, the new and improved Dragon Guard build. It's just crazy fun. I can't help myself. I love this build. and I never liked DK, guys. I used to just despise DK, and until I played this. Once I started playing this, I fell in love with DK. I thought it was like the coolest thing. Now, this is a resource extensive build, so you do have to use potions quite a bit, and you do have to use synergy like orbs and spear shards when they're off cooldown. This one does need that. But if you can pull off some light and heavy attacks, you can maintain, or heavy attacks, you can maintain your resources pretty good. But that's pretty much it for the Dragon Guard, guys. I hope that you guys like this build. If you guys do, hit that like button. If you guys want to see more build videos by me, or just see other videos by me, you can hit that subscribe button. And before I say anything else, this is the end of the 10 tank build week. So I've released 10 tank builds in this week, and I just want to say thank you to all my supporters out there for keeping me encouraged to keep pushing forward and keep releasing new builds for you guys. I have a video coming out tomorrow. I was going to wait until I had all the builds done before I release this video, but I'm going to do it tomorrow. And I just want you guys to understand that that video is going to explain a lot of things, and it's going to show you guys a lot of things you've never known about the game. Well, nah, you know about the game, but it'll explain a lot of things that it's just gonna open your eyes to a lot of things that you guys will see why these builds, these 10 builds, work the way they do. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.